If you're going to be grappling, it's going to be really essential that you build up the strength of your arms, and you might be surprised that you would hear that, but it's really, really important. Your arms are your interaction point with your opponent. When we look at the jiu-jitsu research, and we'll mention this like a little bit later in the video, your injuries show up all the time around the fingers, the hands, the wrists, the elbows. It goes the same with the lower limb. And the reason is because these are interaction points with our opponent. Like when you physically grab your opponent in grappling, like you can't actually submit someone until you make contact with them and maintain that contact all the way to submission. So the way that you grab your opponent, that's really, really important, and it's going to be essential that you train the limbs that deal with that in a really productive way in the gym and in your strength and conditioning. Another thing is, the limbs, especially like the elbow joint and the knee joint, they're some of the primary targets of most of the submissions that we do. Most of the joint locks really focus around those. Yes, there's the shoulder and the hip, but primarily it is the knee and the elbow. So as a consequence of that, it's a really good idea to wrap a lot of muscle around these joints and make them really strong, just to generally increase their robustness. Like jiu-jitsu and other grappling sports are going to be really tough on those joints, so just giving them the best chance that they possibly have would be a really good idea. There's a couple of different strategies that we like to use here, and we're going to take a look at one of them now. I think this is, if you don't have a lot of exposure to arm training or just specific training like that, this is going to be the best bang for your buck. Without a shadow of a doubt, just do this and do this lots. Right, so full seated bicep curl. This is a great exercise, especially if you haven't done a huge amount of these in the past. There's a couple of kind of key things that we want to take a look at here. Biceps key actions are to flex the elbow, and then it also deals with a bit of supination at the wrist, especially involving this brachioradialis muscle here. This is all really important because when we are gripping and grappling, it is dynamic, and we will also be rotating through the arm like this. So we want him to, as soon as the dumbbells break his legs, we want to see him start to supinate those dumbbells and turn them all the way. We want to see it supinate and turn all the way like this as much as we flex the elbow. So we want to see both things happen to their fullest and shortest extent here. We also, at the bottom, want to flare our tricep at the bottom so we can fully lengthen the bicep tendon at the elbow here. It is a small difference, but it's nice to get a bit of load directly through this joint, especially when you're going to be getting a bit of load directly through this joint in jiu-jitsu. Adding a lot of grip to this as well, especially just squeezing really hard, white knuckling the dumbbells is the cue that we like to give. It's just going to involve a lot of that forearm compartment as well. And you can see in this, we only gave them like light dumbbells to demonstrate this, because even doing 10, 12, 15 reps, it's going to be really tough with like even 5 kilos. So I would strip the weight right back on these, do these super controlled with like 5, 6, 7 kilos, and then start building the load up, and I promise you, your arms will fucking explode. So with that, we had a look at what I said, really good exercise, best bang for your buck in terms of like, if you haven't had a huge exposure to arm training before, that's going to take you through elbow flexion, supination at the wrist. That's going to take you through a lot of primary actions of the bicep, and that's going to get you training really nice stimulus through that joint initially. And then from there, and now we can kind of take a look at some more, not specific work, but other things that you can kind of use to fluff out the training. Keep in mind that a lot of what you're going to do to try to get the primary benefits of training on the upper limbs is your compound movements. Like your rows and your pull-ups and stuff are really going to help you a lot more than, well, bicep curls will. But there's just enough of a reason there to do this sort of thing that this sort of thing becomes a really good idea. So on that, let's take a look at some of the forearm work that we can have a look at. So when we want to train the forearms, we want to look at doing both flexion work and extension work. There's a lot of muscles in that forearm compartment, and they deal with various things from moving and turning the wrists to opening and closing the fingers. We just want to deal with training each of the compartments individually. So here we can see us going through some work for flexion, and in a moment we're going to have a look at some extension work as well. Covering both of these aspects is just generally going to give us a little bit of training in this area if we feel like there's some strength lacking, or if we feel that this is often an area that burns out in training, or that we feel that we just want a little bit more strength in. That is one of the things that we can take a look at, and then past that, there are other tricep things. We're going to have a tricep video later because I think that pertains more to like framing and that sort of thing. So we're going to leave that separate. We're just trying to focus on the biceps and like the brachioradialis flexor, forearm compartment, that sort of thing at the moment. So on that, now that that's kind of covered, one of the other things that we want to have a look at is, okay, that's very well and good for that's the muscles and the movements that we're going to do, but what way are we going to use that in jiu-jitsu and other grappling sports? Like the main thing is going to be that we look at training and endurance kind of stimulus as well. So we're going to take a look at that now as well. So in this set, we can see that we're basically just going to go and we're just going to do a lot of reps. There are, without a doubt, a lot fancier ways that we could program this, but also if you just keep doing the stimulus for longer and longer, you will get an endurance stimulus on the tissue as that tissue fatigues. Again, if you don't have a huge amount of exposure to specific training, simply doing more reps like this is enough to get an endurance stimulus out of the tissue. And this is going to be a really good way that you can introduce something that will really fatigue that tissue out, make you feel like you got a really good workout, as well as giving you an adaptation to stimulus that's probably going to carry over a little bit into what you're doing on the mats. Now, the last thing that we're going to take a look at on this, again, it's getting a little bit more specific as we get into things, but we're going to look at like grip variables. So we can take a look here at using a gi or using a towel if you don't have a gi in order to get a bit of a variable stimulus through this. There's nothing really fancy going on here. Like we said earlier, some of the muscles in the forearm are responsible for controlling the fingers flexing and extending. And those muscles here are just having to work a lot harder as we squeeze the gi or the towel in an effort to keep that weight in place as we go through our flexion and extension motion at the elbow. This is something that you could just do again, when you've been doing arm work for a little bit longer. It can be something that we do in the lead up to competition as we try to like peak some of our different accessory movements. And there's just a couple of different ways that we can look at adding these types of things into the training in a way to vary the stimulus. It's not particularly groundbreaking. Like I said, pull-ups and rows are still going to be your best bet. But this is going to be really good, and it's going to give us at least a variable on that stimulus. Right, to summarize, we've seen the full seated bicep curl there as we see it. That's going to be really good bang for your buck. Get that done. We took a look at some of the forearm work, some of the flexion and the extension work. We took a look at how you can use the bicep curl and other arm work, any of the movements that we looked at today really, as an endurance stimulus by simply adding more reps and more volume per set, taking those tissues to fatigue. And then the last thing that we looked at was introducing different grip variables and how we can use that to just vary the stimulus that those exercises provide us, especially at the forearm and at those individual muscles that deal with the fingers and the finger flexion, the grip like this. So, if you like this, if you want to see more like this, like, comment, subscribe, do all that sort of thing, and we'll try to get more videos